I never expected to notice her. Not really. She was just the woman who lived across the hall, mid-40s, I guessed, maybe a little older. Always neat. Always polite. The kind of neighbor you nod at, but never think much about. Except that morning, she stepped into the laundromat at the same time I did. And somehow, that made all the difference. The place was nearly empty. Just the hum of machines, the smell of detergent hanging thick in the air. I was juggling a basket on my hip, headphones around my neck, pretending to check my phone so I didn't have to make small talk with anyone. Then she walked in, carrying a folded bag of clothes like it weighed nothing. She noticed me before I could duck my head. "Morning," she said, soft, like she wasn't sure if I'd answer. "Morning," I managed, too quick. My voice cracked slightly, which made me feel 12 again. I tried to look busy pouring quarters into the slot, but I kept catching myself glancing at her. She was across the room, loading whites into the machine, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear when it fell forward. Small movements, ordinary, and yet I couldn't stop noticing them. When she shut the lid, she caught me looking. Not long enough to embarrass me, but long enough that I knew she knew. She smiled. Just a corner smile, nothing more. I swallowed and looked back at my phone, though the screen was dark. She broke the silence first. "You always come at this time?" I shrugged. "Usually. Machines are free around now." "Smart." She nodded, lips pressing into something close to amusement. "You've got it figured out." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just nodded. The spin cycle roared to life, filling the pause between us. 15 minutes later, we were sitting 2 chairs apart, both waiting. She had a paperback open, but her eyes weren't really on it. Mine weren't on my phone either. At some point she leaned over just slightly, enough to ask, "Coffee? You strike me as a black coffee type." That caught me. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "Not black. 2 sugars. Always. 2 sugars." She closed her book, like that was a piece of information worth keeping. I'll remember that. Something in the way she said it, calm, certain, made me shift in my chair. I folded and refolded the napkin I'd been using as a coaster for my water bottle. My fingers wouldn't stay still. She noticed. She noticed everything. The rest of the wash went by with half conversations, pauses that weren't uncomfortable but weren't easy either. She asked what I did. I told her about school, about picking up shifts at the cafe down the block. She listened, really listened, the way most people don't. Every so often, she tilted her head, like she was storing the words away. When her dryer buzzed, she stood and began folding her clothes, quick, efficient. Mine still had 10 minutes to go. I watched her stack shirts into a neat pile, slipping a lavender-scented sheet between layers. It smelled like her apartment sometimes, when the hallway carried scents under the doors. She finished, tucked everything back into her bag, and looked at me. For a moment, I thought she'd just nod goodbye and leave. Instead, she hesitated. Then she said, lightly, "You know, if you're ever out of sugar, knock on my door. I've got plenty." She left before I could answer. And I sat there, staring at the quiet machines, my phone buzzing in my pocket. A message I hadn't expected lit up the screen. "Don't forget, 2 sugars. Next time, coffee's on me." I thought I was safe in my little routines. But she had just crossed some invisible line. I didn't knock on her door right away. I told myself it would seem strange, a grown man in his 20s asking a woman twice his age for sugar. But the thought sat there, restless in the back of my mind. 2 sugars. Coffee. On her. It was 3 days later when I found myself standing outside her apartment anyway, holding a wrench I'd borrowed from the cafe. My sink had started leaking, and I heard her moving around inside. It felt easier to ask her than call the landlord. That's what I told myself. She opened the door in a loose sweater, sleeves pushed up. Her hair was pinned back loosely, a few strands falling around her face. She looked surprised, then amused. "Either you're here for sugar," she said, "or something's wrong." I held up the wrench. "Leaky sink. Thought maybe you'd know what to do." "Oh." She leaned on the doorframe. "You picked the wrong neighbor. But I'll take a look." Minutes later, she was crouched under my sink, sleeves rolled higher, studying the pipe with a kind of determination that didn't match the task. I knelt nearby, handing her the wrench when she gestured for it. We weren't close enough to touch, but the narrow kitchen made it feel like we were. "You live alone?" she asked casually, still looking at the pipe. "Yeah." I hesitated. "You?" She paused, then gave a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Divorced. 5 years now." She tightened something, wiped her hand on a towel. "He got the house. I got the quiet." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, watching the way her fingers pressed against the cold metal. Something about her honesty, how simply she said it, made me want to answer with something true of my own. "My mom still texts me about checking in," I said. "Like I'm 16. I don't answer half the time." She glanced at me then, eyebrows raised just slightly. "She worries. That's not a bad thing." "Yeah, I guess." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was heavier, like something had shifted between us. The sink stopped dripping eventually, though I wasn't sure whether it was her quick fix or coincidence. She stood, brushing her palms against her sweater, and looked around my half-empty apartment. "You should get a plant," she said. "Something green. Doesn't feel so temporary." I laughed under my breath. "I can barely keep bread from going stale." Her lips curved. "I'll teach you, if you want." She moved toward the door, but paused before opening it. For a second, she just stood there, as if debating something. Then she reached out, touched my wrist lightly, barely a brush of fingers, and said, "Next time, don't wait 3 days." And then she was gone. I stood in the quiet, staring at the faint mark where her touch lingered. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. After that night with the sink, I found myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway. The shuffle of her keys, the soft thud of her door closing. It all drew me closer than I wanted to admit. She invited me in a week later. Not for coffee, not for sugar, just because she saw me carrying groceries. "You'll pull your shoulder like that?" she said, taking half the bags before I could argue. Her apartment smelled like tea and something faintly floral. Warmer than mine, softer somehow. Books stacked on the table, a plant drooping by the window, dishes drying neatly by the sink. Lived in. Safe. She poured tea into mismatched mugs. One had a faded picture of a lighthouse, the other just plain white. She pushed the plain one toward me. "You don't seem like the lighthouse type," she murmured, eyes lowered. I smiled at that, though my hands were tight around the mug. "What type am I then?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me for a second too long. We sat in that stillness, steam rising between us. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A friend, probably, asking if I was coming out that night. I ignored it. She noticed the vibration, the way I hesitated, and said nothing. At one point, I told her about working late shifts at the cafe. She asked if it ever got lonely, being out there while everyone else was asleep. I shrugged. "Not really. Sometimes. Depends." But the truth came out in smaller ways. How I lingered when she spoke. How I looked at her hands when she set her mug down, steady and careful, as if she measured the space between us. Then, the interruption. A knock at her door. It was the woman from 2 floors down, dropping off a misdelivered package. She glanced between us. Me in her kitchen, her standing close. And for a flicker of a second, I felt seen in a way I shouldn't. The package was handed over. Polite smiles exchanged. The door shut again. But the air was different. She laughed softly, almost nervously, setting the box aside. "People notice everything in this building." I shifted in my chair. So, she trailed off, not finishing. Instead, she picked up her mug, took a sip that lingered too long. The silence pressed in. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. She mirrored me without thinking, chin resting against her hand. Our faces too close now, her eyes flicking to my mouth, then away. For a breath, just one, it felt inevitable. But she pulled back first. A small movement, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked toward the window, as if the plant suddenly needed saving. I stayed frozen, mug cooling in my hands. My throat tight. She cleared hers and said, almost too lightly, "You should go before it gets late." I nodded, but when I stood, I hesitated at the doorway. We were only inches apart again, both of us pretending not to notice. Her hand lifted slightly, not to touch, not quite, just a flicker of hesitation in the space between us. And then nothing. We ended up walking one night. Not planned. I'd come back late from the cafe, and she was sitting on the front steps of the building, a light jacket over her shoulders, arms folded like she'd been waiting for something she didn't want to name. "You're out late," she said as I approached. "Work." I held up the strap of my bag, as if that explained everything. She nodded, then patted the step beside her. The invitation was quiet, almost careless, but I sat anyway. The street was nearly empty, a few cars humming by in the distance. Overhead, the streetlight buzzed. For a while we just watched the sidewalk, saying nothing. "You ever feel like people expect you to stay in your lane?" she asked finally, her voice soft, like she wasn't even sure if she wanted me to hear. "Yeah," I said. And after a pause, "All the time." She looked over at me then, her face half in shadow, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "I think I'm tired of it." Something knotted in my chest. I didn't answer right away, because I didn't trust what would come out. I tried for safe. "Rough day." She gave a small laugh, dry and bitter. "Not rough. Just long. I saw my ex's kid earlier. She's 21 now, old enough to rent her own place. And all I could think was, what am I doing here? Sitting alone on a step at night?" Her words hung there. I shifted, fingers laced together too tightly in my lap. "Maybe," I said slowly, "you just wanted someone to sit with." Her gaze caught mine. Steady. Searching. Something passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. The hum of the streetlight filled the silence. I glanced at her hands, resting in her lap, the tips of her fingers brushing the fabric of her sleeve. Close enough to touch, but I didn't. She leaned back slightly, exhaling. "You're too young for this," she murmured. Not cruel, not dismissive, just fact. "I don't feel young," I said. That made her turn, fully, her face so close I could see the faint lines near her mouth, the tired brightness in her eyes. "But you are." I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. My pulse felt loud in my ears. Her expression softened, almost regretful, almost something else. "If anyone saw us like this," she trailed off, "they'd say it was wrong." "And you?" My voice cracked slightly. "What do you say?" She froze. The smallest shift, her fingers curling in on themselves, her lips parting like a word might escape if she wasn't careful. But nothing came. The street stayed quiet. A car passed, headlights sweeping across us, then gone. She finally whispered, barely audible, "I don't know." I turned toward her then, close enough that the distance between us was more decision than accident. And that was when the question, silent, heavy, rose between us, unspoken but undeniable. Do we cross it, or not? After that night on the steps, something shifted. Or maybe it just cracked. The next morning, I half expected to see her in the hallway, maybe with that same hesitant smile, maybe saying something light to cover what almost happened. But her door stayed closed. A day passed, then two. I tried not to notice. Tried to keep to my shifts, to school, to the dull routine of laundry and half-eaten takeout. But every time I walked by her apartment, I slowed, listening. Nothing. On the third day, I finally saw her in the lobby. She was carrying a tote bag, hair tied back tighter than usual, dressed sharper. Different. "Hey," I said, too quickly, relief leaking into my voice. She looked up, smiled. But it wasn't the same smile. It was polite, practiced. "Hi." Headed out. "I'm late." And just like that, she was gone, out the glass doors before I could ask anything. The whiplash left me unsteady. A week ago, she was touching my wrist in my kitchen. A few nights ago, whispering she didn't know. And now nothing. I told myself not to read into it. She had a life I knew almost nothing about. Work, friends, an ex-husband who occasionally called. Once, I'd heard her muffled voice through the wall, low and tight, saying, I don't want to have this conversation again. And then there was the other thing. Something I hadn't considered until she mentioned it that night on the steps. A child. Grown now, maybe my age, maybe close enough that the thought made my stomach tighten. That explained the sudden distance, didn't it? One evening, I came home late again and saw her door cracked open. Light spilling out, faint music playing inside. For a moment I thought about knocking, asking if she was okay, just being there. Instead, I stood there, keys in my hand, heart thudding against the quiet hallway. I imagined the conversation. She'd open the door, maybe relieved, maybe angry. Maybe she'd tell me I was too young. Again, this time without the softness. I didn't knock. I went into my own apartment, shut the door, and leaned against it. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend. Plans, noise, distraction. I ignored it. Later, I opened a blank text. Are you avoiding me? Deleted it. Typed again. I didn't mean to make things complicated. Deleted that too. What I finally left on the screen was just coffee, but I never pressed send. I lay in bed, staring at the glow of the phone until it went dark. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was raining the night it finally broke. Not hard, just a steady drizzle that blurred the streetlights and made the pavement shine. I came home soaked, jacket clinging to me, and she was there in the hallway, fumbling with her keys. She glanced at me, then at the water dripping from my hair. You'll catch something, she said softly. I shrugged. Already caught it. It was a bad joke, but she smiled, brief and reluctant. Her hand stayed on her doorknob, like she was deciding. Then she stepped aside. Come in. Just for a minute. Her apartment was warm, smelling faintly of chamomile tea. She handed me a towel without a word, and I stood there drying my hair while she moved to the kitchen. She filled the kettle, then leaned against the counter, arms folded. We didn't speak until the water started to hum. You've been quiet, I said finally. Her eyes lifted to mine. No evasions this time. I thought maybe that was best. Best for who? She let the question hang there. Then, for you. You're young. You have time to. She stopped herself, exhaled. And for me, because I know better. I didn't move closer, but my voice did. Do you? The kettle whistled sharply, breaking the moment. She turned, poured the water over the tea, buying herself seconds. When she set the mugs on the table, she didn't sit right away. She hovered, restless, then finally lowered herself across from me. I don't want to be a mistake in your life, she said quietly. Something you look back on and regret. I swallowed. My hands wrapped around the mug though I didn't drink. And what if I don't? Her face flickered, surprise, then something heavier. She pressed her palms against the table, fingers splayed, as if bracing herself. Then I'm the one who regrets it. Silence pressed between us. Not empty, not awkward, just full. I leaned forward, not touching, not reaching, just enough that my words wouldn't get lost. You don't scare me. Her lips parted like she might argue, but no words came. Instead, she reached out and brushed her fingertips lightly against my damp sleeve, as if testing how real I was. The smallest gesture, but it landed like a confession. We sat like that, my arm under her touch, her eyes lowered, both of us too aware of how far it could go. Finally, she whispered, So what do we do? I didn't have an answer. Other days she'd knock with leftovers, or I'd carry her groceries without asking. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of love you see in films. It was quieter than that. Quieter, but deeper. I still went to the cafe, worked late shifts, took classes. She still kept her routines, morning walks, laundry on Saturdays, tea before bed. But somewhere in all of that, our lives began overlapping in ways that felt less like chance and more like choice. One night, we ended up on the bench outside again. Same streetlight buzzing overhead, same faint hum of traffic in the distance. This time, though, there was no hesitation. She leaned into me, her shoulder brushing mine, and I didn't overthink it. We just sat, breathing the same cool air. You ever regret it? She asked suddenly, voice barely above the noise of the street. I glanced at her, Regret what? Letting me in. All this. She gestured vaguely between us. I worry I pulled you into something heavier than you needed. I thought about answering with reassurance, but the truth felt better. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I wonder what it means, where it goes. But mostly, I paused, my fingers brushing the back of her hand. Mostly it feels worth it. Her lips pressed together, like she was holding back both a smile and tears. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. After that, little rituals built themselves. She started keeping 2 mugs on the counter, one plain white and one with a faded lighthouse. In the mornings, when we crossed paths, she'd raise hers and say, 8:47, like she'd marked the time of our first chance routine. I'd grin, pretending to check my watch even if it wasn't exact. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes she pulled away, lost in her own thoughts. Sometimes I got restless, wondering if I was giving too much, too soon. But each time, we found our way back. Over tea, over groceries, over the quiet company of 2 people who'd learned not to expect fireworks, just steady light. One night, I stayed later than usual, helping her repot the drooping plant by the window. Soil on our hands, laughter breaking between silences. When it was done, she leaned back, dirt smudged on her cheek, and looked at me the way she had the very first time, in that laundromat, when she remembered how I took my coffee. 2 sugars, she said softly, almost to herself. I smiled. Always. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a line had been crossed. It felt like we'd found where we belonged. What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?